Hi, I'm speaking with Vishaan Chakrabarti, founder of PAU, Practice for Architecture and Urbanism, and a professor at Columbia University. So last year we met in San Diego when you came to speak about affordable housing for Context 4 for the San Diego Architectural Foundation, and this year I'm at your office in New York, and it's a totally different view. So what are your first recollections of experiencing architecture?
Of being very young and traveling with my family a great deal. My dad was a scientist, my mom was a librarian and a musician, and even though they didn't have a lot of money, but we traveled to a lot of different cities when we were young. Mm-hmm. And so what I really remember, train stations and airports and just the infrastructure. That and the museums, I remember the Louvre or the Science Museum in Amsterdam, the National Gallery, just certain things really stick out. And then of course, things like the Taj Mahal and just seeing certain landmarks. But just more generally, just cities, just walking around cities and understanding different cities. And how you move among them, mm-hmm. A great train ride once from Helsinki to what was then St. Petersburg. We went to, what was then Leningrad, right before it became St. Petersburg. Mm-hmm. And just, I think that's all been deeply influential in terms of, especially the urbanism part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are 3 classic buildings that you like and why?
3 classic buildings. And when you say that, do you mean classic building types or specific buildings?
Specific buildings. And I say 3 because architects can never get just one. Unless you can. I don't know if you can come up with one that's good. Otherwise, it seems like we always say 3.
So the Sydney Opera House always sticks out in my mind. I was asked to give a talk there a few years ago, and it was very moving actually to be in that building because, to me the building is the embodiment of the struggle of architecture. Utzon gets hired in this competition. He's this napkin sketch that the older Sarandon discovers. It's it might be apocryphal, but supposedly literally pulled it from the dustbin of history and told the jury that that's what he should build. And then he was 26 years old. Auvert was the one who really figured out how to make it stand and that those big sail structures. And then of course Utzon never sees the project realized because it takes so long to build that the government changes and local architects finish the base, and that's very clear when you get there that there's a really, and then of course Ken Frampton writes about that building as the stereotype. So there's just something about that building that to me embodies how difficult it is to be an architect, but also how rewarding architecture itself is, and what it can do. Mm-hmm. When we landed in Sydney that day, the pilot actually pointed out the Opera House as something for passengers to look at out the seat of their airline. And I thought, gee, how many low-slung modern buildings do pilots from planes point out?
Exactly.
It just doesn't happen.
Yes.
It doesn't happen
really
that
is.
often. It's a big building, but it's much smaller than the Empire State Building or the Eiffel Tower or something like it's kind of extraordinary. So that is one for sure. There have been others. The first time I went to the Eames House, there's something about just the quality of the proportions and the way in which it's made. This kind of optimism that embodied about the United States was really something that I think was extraordinary. Mm-hmm. And then one of my favorite ruins is Fatehpur Sikri, which is outside of Agra. It was built by Shah Jahan's grandfather and is an extraordinary kind of abandoned city. It's really best to go there early morning or late at night. And there are other examples like that, but always a mix of new and old. Mm-hmm. Never just one to glom onto only modern architecture, only historic architecture.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like the mix of old and new.
Yeah.
Also. I've always been attracted. I don't know whether it's the philosophical kind of aspect of it, that you're looking at the past and you're looking to the future, and
Well, yeah, I think this is the fundamental difference in terms of 21st century contemporary architecture versus the 20th century. The 20th century modernism, born out of the wake of World War I, was all about sort of reinventing history, and I don't think that's the moment we live in anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think we live in a moment that's much more about actually concern for the loss of history. So for us, like projects like Domino, where you're not just a guardian of the past, you're a guardian of the future of the past,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you're creating this dialogue between what was an extraordinarily important building in Brooklyn's history, and kind of thinking about it in a completely new way as a new use.
Mm-hmm.
That's exciting for people, because people, they know their cities are growing, and yet they just see this kind of forest of blue glass going up everywhere, and it's very off-putting. And so for architecture to be able to take older things and kind of integrate them into newer things, and have that sense of identity and history still in place.
Yeah.
I think that's the fun, and of course sustainability is a big part of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just a fundamentally different moment than where we were almost precisely 100 years ago, with the beginnings in both Russia and in Germany of modernism as we knew in the 20th century.
Yeah. What do you like best about being an architect? Or what do you like about being an architect?
I love being an architect, and I love it to its bone. I love everything. I think to me, and this is I think part of why I still teach, to me architectural education is the most unique form of education that I know of in the professional disciplines.
Yes.
Because I think if you're in law school or business school or medical school, those are all great professional disciplines, but the form of education is very different. You're asked to sort of read a book and kind of regurgitate that book. And whereas architecture needs to remain fact-based, there's still this idea that someone hands you a blank piece of paper and then says, well, it's more than just a blank piece of paper. There's the site and the program and climate and materials and all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all sauce for the goose. How do you then take it and make dinner out of it? And,
Mm-hmm.
and that's yours to invent at a certain level. And obviously that's school. That's not the real world. The real world has a lot more exigencies put on what you can and can't do. But I still think that fundamental act of creation is something that I can't believe I get to do what I do all day. I really don't. I can't believe that I get there and I sit with this great team of people and we're like, should that building be red? Yeah, that building should be red. Right?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And
right?
it's going to be built, and people are going to experience it
and
every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And look, and you might have made the wrong decision, but it's still there's something just fundamentally intentional about it that I love.
Mm-hmm. What made you apply for fellowship, and what was your topic?
My topic was really oriented towards public service and how architecture works in public service. I applied for fellowship, I think, because in part I probably feel a little old, but also that, I think we're at a critical juncture in history in terms of practice, and I think especially with everything that's gone on in the Me Too movement, with both women in the field and more racial diversity in the field, that this is a painful transition, but a very necessary one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as this transition occurs, places like the AIA, the idea that the leadership, like the fellows and other parts of the AIA, play a strong role in that, how the code of ethics transforms, we have to stop as a discipline saying, well, sometimes great and beautiful things can be made by terrible people, right? And maybe that was historically true, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that was historically true, but that doesn't make it correct going into the future. And so I think that, and to me what that opens up is an enormous possibility for women in the field, for people of color in the field, that frankly have had almost no voice in the field to date. And so to me, I think what I'm really proud about with fellowship is we are right at that inflection point in terms of practice and in terms of culture, and there's so much at stake because the world needs us to help address climate change and social inequity and figure out what to do with technological advancement in terms of what's happening in our cities. So architecture is really relevant right now. And so for it to be relevant to society as an outward-looking thing, but also to be inward-looking and saying, how do we practice? Is it a fair playing field? Is everyone welcome? Right? That's, I think, the real. I think that's an extraordinary moment, and that was really kind of my incentive to pursue this.
Yeah. And I think including, all members of the population included in the people who are designing the spaces for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, that is not some diversity PC checklist. If you look out in my office, you'll see an extraordinary amount of diversity.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And what is just really clear to me, whether it's, incredibly brilliant young woman from Jordan or a guy who lives in public housing, the differences in background that these people bring to the table make our design work different, richer, better than it would be if it was a more homogeneous group of people. So to me, this is not just something that you do because it's actually enlightened self-interest. It makes our work better.
Yes.
And so that to me is, and I think the thesis used to be that no, it will make your work worse because it means that it's not the same set of guys from the same set of schools, right, that come from the same set of hometowns and the same set of country clubs. And I think that those days are just gone.
Yeah.
Good riddance.
Yeah. I thought somebody was saying something to me the other day about how they had designed a laundry room, like in multifamily housing. They had designed this laundry room, and they were like talking about this stuff, and I said, well, have you ever been in a laundry room? And they had never been in a laundry room. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So it was like, here are these functions that people use all the time, and this person had never been in that, they had never, well, no, it's just like, it's in your house, it's in your garage, it's like, I've never had to go to a laundromat, I've never had to do any of those things. Yeah.
And these, I mean, look, we do a fair amount of work in distressed communities. We're doing affordable housing projects in some fairly low-income places, and having people who can relate to that situation is extraordinarily important. And it stops being this top-down thing and instead becomes this thing that's much more sort of organic in how you think about solving problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you like to say about the future of architecture? And I guess we can read your book, your manifesto.
No, well, the book's a little old, actually. The book came out in 2013, which, I mean, if you think about what's going on in our politics, seems like 100 years ago. Again, I would emphasize that I think architecture is more relevant today than it's ever been. Because, Nice said this thing about architecture as the will of the epoch translated into space. And I think what that really means, or the way I choose to interpret it, is that architecture is both a sort of mirror and window into the challenges that society faces at any given time.
Yes.
And to me, those changes are really, like the challenges, climate change, very obviously, but social inequity, where I think architects can do a lot in terms of how we deliver housing, how we think about infrastructure and rights to infrastructure and the right to the city. And then technological advancement, not just in terms of how architecture is delivered, but just, when autonomous vehicles do come, that will have all these knock-on effects, from how do you design a street to what happens when 1 million drivers are thrown out of their jobs, and how do we think about the workspace of the future? Where is it located? How accessible is it? So, I just think that architecture is at a moment where it just, when you really think about it in the larger context of the entire built environment, we're at a moment of great relevance. The thing that we have to be careful of is that we're not just talking to other architects, but actually talking to political leadership and people who have real decisions over how the space of the city gets used.
Yeah. Do you plan on going into politics or anything? That's what I was asked recently. I'm a planning commissioner, and and this is my 9th year or whatever, and I'm like, I said, I just feel like architects and urban planners, like, we do all of the work, and then the politicians take credit for it or something at some point.
Well, yeah, there's always that dynamic, the ribbon cutting. No, I mean, I doubt it. I doubt it very much. I'm very happy at PAU. I think this is where I belong. I did work in public service in the Bloomberg administration, and I loved it. I thought it was great, and I often tell young architects that you might want to think about working in government for a few years. I think you can learn a ton about just how the world works and how things are. The funny thing is, I do understand the flip side of why politicians take credit for projects.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because from the government perspective, an awful lot happens because of their actions, right? And so, they didn't draw the building, they didn't finance the building, they didn't paint the building, but they had an awful lot to do with the setup of letting the building happen. And those are policy decisions that are often very difficult policy decisions, where you're compromising a lot of different, among a lot of different constituents and so forth. It's a tough job. Government's a tough job. So no, but what I do think we will always be a political architecture firm in some way. I mean, I just believe that all architecture is political, and we will always believe that this is really the fundamental separation, I think, between architecture and art. Art is political, but only in a much broader social, cultural milieu. Architecture is political on the ground, where you put a door. Is there a security camera? Like the design of restrooms, right? Like all of these things are political in a way that's very, very direct. And so that's why I just don't think anything we do will ever be politically neutral, and which is why outside of our work for clients, we're probably always going to have some form of political advocacy going on. So we're still very involved in Penn Station and trying to fix Penn. I think there will always be things like that in this office that are broader than just the direct work at hand.
Well, thank you very much.
Sure.
It's always a pleasure to listen to you.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Thank you.